I posed the question on Twitter about a hypothetical, and so I want to make sure that everybody is clear. I'm not asking this question because I think it's definite or even likely. I'm posing this question as a hypothetical because I think this is what's on everyone's mind, is this idea that what's the worst case scenario for Coinbase if the SEC does indeed find that they've listed perhaps some unregistered securities. And what seemed to be the scariest response to that was, I believe it was this is like the third episode in a row I've mentioned Patrick McKenzie, I think, at Patio11 on Twitter, who said something along the lines of, well, anyone who bought these tokens at the price they purchased them at can then request that Coinbase pay them back at purchase price, give them the money back at purchase price, which would probably be pretty devastating for Coinbase in a number of different ways. First off, that's going to end up being quite a bit of money if people take advantage of it. And obviously the market is down, so they probably would. But additionally, it's troubling because if that is proven and they do have to delist all these tokens, I would presume that they are going to have to delist many more tokens, and that could pretty much fuck up their entire business model.
Yes, you are absolutely right that if Coinbase is no longer allowed to list whatever shitcoins they want, their business model is fucked. Their entire business model has become charging exorbitant fees to retail and trying to attract ever more retail investors by listing an increasing list of shit, right? So yeah, if they get told they can't list most of these anymore, that fundamentally alters their business model. But also that has massive ramifications across the entire industry, because if all these things are securities, then all the places listing them are securities exchanges now and are either going to need to register or delist these and delist a bunch other preemptively like you're talking about. Any of the lending places are now doing like lending against securities and need to make sure they're doing that appropriately. And like the fundamental structure of everything alters in a way that no one is ready for.
I guess I'm wondering, what we're seeing with Kraken is a far different issue. I'm wondering how common you think that is as an issue for cryptocurrency exchanges. I also am wondering, I know I've written about this, and I think you probably have too, but I'm wondering about jurisdiction here, right? So how much will these securities issues or whatever alter, let's say, Binance from doing business or FTX from doing business?
Well, I was going to bring up Binance next when you asked about Kraken because, and I feel like this has gone under-noticed, is that a couple weeks ago, Reuters had the reporting that Binance had served a bunch of Iranians, right, and had violated sanctions. And so this reporting coming from Bloomberg so close on that suggests to me that the investigation into Kraken, to which Jesse responded, we're always under investigation.
It was New York Times, wasn't it?
Yes, but not for Binance. For Binance, it was a Reuters investigation. For this one, it was New York Times. But in both cases, it's
But you said Bloomberg just now.
Oh, sorry, you're right. No, it's New York Times. I meant, New York Times.
Okay, cool. Sorry.
Bloomberg had the scoop on Coinbase being under investigation by the SEC. You're right, New York Times. But I think I think it hints at the possibility that there is a much larger federal investigation going on. And we've seen basically a whole bunch of federal agencies have ongoing investigations into Bitfinex, Tether, Binance, and apparently Kraken all the time, if you listen to Jesse. Now we know Coinbase is under SEC investigation. I think that it is plausible that there is a much broader federal regulatory wake-up going on than I previously assumed, and that I might have previously misjudged its size.
Yeah, I mean, it could very well be that we have another Liberty Reserve on our hands, but
or Black Friday.
I think it's our responsibility to not. We're Black Friday, but look, I want to saying dramatic statements like that. I want to equalize this and make sure that we are not fomenting panic or, causing people to immediately go out and sell whatever they hold. That is not what we're trying to do. We're talking about a real risk And the fact that it's a risk does not mean that it's going to happen, does not mean that anything ultimately bad will happen to any of these exchanges. We have no idea what's going to happen. And in the past 5 years, nothing has happened. So I think it's fair to say that, like, if you look at the past 5 years of history, it hasn't been a big issue, right? So, and I mean, there's been little things. There's been like the CFTC fine against Bitfinex. There's been the New York Attorney General office going after Bitfinex and Tether. Wonderful things that happened, and I'm glad they happened. But that is a very small numerical set when you can think about how many cryptocurrency exchanges have existed and fallen apart or still exist to this day. So yeah, those numbers are very tiny. And even the ones we're talking about, real regulatory risk, I mean, I don't really know. I don't know. They're able to get Liberty Reserve. That's in Costa Rica. So I think that's a pretty amiable country to American law. But I think a lot of these individuals, like 3AC, and we already saw, I mean, Arthur Hayes of BitMEX fame, which is, if anyone is unfamiliar, is essentially a derivatives. It's not physically settled Bitcoin exchange. It's like spot, right?
No, it's not spot. It's derivatives trading.
So it's not spot. It's what's the other one?
Futures. Derivatives. Leverage.
It's futures contracts. Yeah. It's futures contracts. And they famously, I think even the company is something like 100x or whatever it's called. They famously let you 100x your leverage and immediately get liquidated if you wanted to do that. But he ultimately, Arthur Hayes, who was the CEO, got in trouble with I believe it was was it the SEC or the DOJ?
It was the DOJ under BSA issues. Bank Secrecy Act.
Right. Bank Secrecy Act. So yeah, Arthur Hayes got in trouble, but he was in Singapore, kind of on the run, eventually turned himself in. It seems like he's going to get off with a slap on the wrist and be fine. I don't see much happening there. If any of these work out that way, I would presume it would also be similar, but like the actions of 3AC, for instance, or Do Kwon make one wonder if these individuals are as amiable to U.S. law and coming in and talking to U.S. regulators and lawyers after getting in trouble. So I have my doubts, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly reasons to have doubts for several of the reasons you brought up here. One, there hasn't been a ton of regulator action. There hasn't been a ton of law enforcement action, so betting against it has been a very safe bet. And then, as you mentioned, cryptocurrency companies very intentionally play a game where they try to position themselves out of jurisdictions and in places where it's going to be expensive or politically difficult for the U.S. to enforce its laws, right? That's part of the tactic, and we've talked about it on half a dozen of these episodes. But, like, that doesn't apply to Coinbase. That doesn't apply to Kraken. That doesn't apply to anyone who's in a place with a pretty comfortable extradition treaty. Like, there's still a lot of people who are still potentially in play, and a lot of other people who can have their life made immeasurably more difficult, if that is the tactic that U.S. law enforcement and regulators are actually intending to go with. But